Hello tech enthusiasts. So today I have some very interesting news for you. You know the iPhone 14 Pro that was released last year? Well, it seems that Apple has upgraded it in the camera system, and it's a huge change, and in this video I wanted to tell you all about it. But first, let me just explain that I saw the iPhone 15 Pro, I was considering it, and I'm very tempted by the whole USB-C that you can like record externally to, a flash drive or an SSD. It's just that most of my videos are shot with a mirrorless camera anyway, so I don't really need that feature. Also, being able to film and log, that's a big thing, and I really like that. But I just discovered that Apple, intentionally or unintentionally, put in an upgrade in iOS 17 that actually makes you take better photos. Now, I need to do some more testing and stuff like that, and there's a couple of changes that I've actually seen. I believe that cinematic mode is also looking a bit better in iOS 17. Maybe you can confirm, maybe you tested and compared, but that's not the big thing that Apple has done to the iPhone 14 Pro. So, if you recall, last year, when we got the iPhone 14 Pro, you could now shoot in 48 megapixels. That was a huge upgrade from the 12 to the 48. Like, that's like 4 times as big or something like that. With my gorilla math, it's kind of difficult to calculate these things. Anyway, the biggest problem with that is that you had to shoot in RAW, and the RAW images were really big. And I used to do this thing, like I always take my photos in 48 megapixels, and then I transfer them to my computer using AirDrop, and then I convert it. It's actually a very simple thing to do in macOS. You just, right-click on the file and you convert it to, whatever format you want, but basically it's a more compressed file. And, compressed files these days, they look almost as good as the RAW shots. Like, don't get me wrong, shooting in RAW, it definitely has its benefits, but for most people, for most photos, you really don't need to shoot in RAW. So I remembered I was feeling very bummed out about this feature, but it turns out that with iOS 17, the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max, and even the regular one, you can now shoot in 48 megapixels in basically JPEG or HEIC, the efficient format. And I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. That's really cool because I take a lot of photos in 48 megapixels. That was almost reason for me to buy the iPhone 15 Pro. Thank goodness that I did upgrade for that feature alone, because it turns out, yes, that's true. It's on the iPhone 14 Pro as well. So what exactly am I saying here? Well, if you go into the camera settings, you go into your settings, and then you go to the camera, and then you look at the ProRAW function, and you can toggle to shoot in JPEG Max. Basically meaning that you can now take 48 megapixel photos in JPEG. Isn't that brilliant? Isn't that fantastic? And I think this feature, it wasn't highlighted enough in the presentation, but I think it's pretty cool. Really, the weird thing about this entire thing is that it's so unlike Apple. Apple never does these sort of things. Like, sometimes they'll put in these little tweaks in the software, and they only keep it available for the latest version of the iPhone. So it gives people a reason to upgrade their iPhone 14 Pro to the iPhone 15. But in this case, I just don't get it. Like, why did they give us this option? This is a pretty big deal. This is one reason where actually I considered getting the iPhone 15 Pro, because I was tired of, converting my RAW files to JPEG files. And with this upgrade, this free upgrade, Apple just did the opposite of what they always do, which is screw old customers over. Sometimes I get that feeling, But it's a big mystery to me. My only thought is maybe that they want people to shoot more in 48 megapixels, but because it's in RAW, most people don't. And when people do comparison shots, they see that Samsung devices are better. I don't know, maybe something like that. Anyway, If you haven't tested out 48 megapixels on the iPhone 14 Pro, it looks great. It looks really good. I've actually done comparisons on my camera channel and it just looks great, even compared to 100 megapixel photos. So if you don't shoot 48 megapixels, like, you really should consider doing it. And if you have the iPhone 14 Pro, now there is no reason to not shoot in 48 megapixels. As far as I'm concerned, iOS 17 is fantastic because of that little feature. Now, they didn't screw up too much. Yes, there's a couple of bugs in iOS 17, which I'm not going to go into. They'll probably iron out these details. But in general, I think iOS 17 looks good enough. Like, the main concern for me is that they didn't ruin the Notes app, because the Notes app is like the most important app in my Apple ecosystem, aside from, Final Cut Pro for obvious reasons. But the Notes app is like super duper important for me. And I was so worried that they were going to change a lot of things, and they didn't. They did some pretty cool things that you can sort of move something. And anyway, I'm not going to go into details about the changes that they did, but iOS 17 looks great. And this one feature, if you didn't know it, now you do, that on iOS 17, if you have the iPhone 14 Pro, you can now shoot 48 megapixel photos in JPEG Max. At least that's what it's called here. I don't know, maybe it's HICV. I can't pronounce that file format, but anyway, it works, it looks great. I actually don't see any difference between the compressed JPEG Max format and RAW, but again, I'm not saying that RAW is bad. If you like shooting RAW, that's a whole different topic of discussion. That's more for the camera channel. In case you didn't know, I also have a camera channel if you want to check that out. Link is in the video description. Anywho, just wanted to share some thoughts about this. Hope you enjoyed this little video, and yeah, see you in the next one.